we'll try to analyze the problems we may have as teachers and the problems that our learners may have too. The first thing is learning to listen, and the topic is real life listening a contradiction? No, not at all. It may seem at first sight, but although classroom listening is not real life listening, it is, however, based on simulated real life situations. It would be very difficult, as you may know, to have real situations happening in class. So, activities based on simulated real-life situations are more motivating and interesting to do than artificial textbook comprehension questions, as we often find in our classes. Now, the next thing is, what are then the characteristics of real-life situations? The first thing is that they appear in the form of informal speech. Now, informal speech usually is produced in brief chunks. No one, when someone is speaking in real life, no one speaks in long chunks. People interrupt themselves, they say, they fill their time with fillers, right? So, that's the thing. There are some pronunciations, not mistakes, but sometimes pronunciation is not the pronunciation you may find to expect when reading something, for example. Another characteristic of real-life situations is that some clauses are unfinished and may be somewhat ungrammatical. And vocabulary also is colloquial. In real life, we use words like guy, like kid, not instead of man or boy. There's also some redundant information and repetition. In real life, we many times insist on some aspects and we give more information than what is really necessary. So, that is to give more emphasis to the information we want to convey. And finally, in real life, it is a one-time listening. In real life, you don't repeat unless the listener asks the speaker to repeat. Now, there are some points that should be considered when presenting a listening exercise. The first is expectations. When we show our students a text or before making them listen to something, we must say something like, you're going to hear, for example, a dialogue between two children or two boys trying to plan their holidays, for example. Or they may have some visual focus. They may have a picture, a drawing, or something like that. Now, purpose. There must always be some purpose when listening. Some purpose must be provided. For example, in this case, preset tasks, preset questions are most useful, but students must sort of predict what they're going to listen to. Now, another important thing is that an ongoing listener response. This means that intermittent answers keep listeners busy and active. This means that it's much better to interrupt the listening a couple of times so that listeners can fill in blanks or do an activity and not wait until the listening passage has ended, right? Because listeners usually get bored. Now, some advice which might be, of course, obvious, but anyway, it's good to tell, is that the activity mustn't be too long because it may cause frustration. When people listen to things which are too difficult for them to grasp, they get frustrated and they lose interest. Now, another interesting tip is that we as teachers must always try to do the activity ourselves before administering to our students. Now, as you know, there are many types of listening activities. Some require short answers. Here we have the activities where students must obey instructions, for example, complete pictures, or tick off items, or make lists, or complete words in a diagram or picture. The other typical text which must be filled in with short answers is for answers which require true and false. True and false, right? They must tick off again true and false. Another short answer activity is detecting mistakes. Students listen to something and they must correct the mistake or just point them out. And then you have a close. You know, it's a listening text with several gaps. Students listen to the whole thing and afterwards they have to fill in blanks with words taken from the listening passage they've just heard. And sentence and vocabulary matching is another interesting, I think, activity which requires short answer. Students here must, of course, match sentence and some kind of vocabulary. Usually it is a good idea to give more items than necessary to give it more interest to the passage. Now, on the other hand, now we have longer answers. Now, longer answers activities are activities which require, obviously, a long answer. For example, students must answer questions, or they must take notes. They must take brief notes as they listen. This is very important and requires some important strategy. Now, paraphrasing also is when they rewrite text in different words. They have a text or they listen to an idea and they have to express the idea in their own words. Now, summarizing. Summarizing is writing a brief summary of the content of the listening passage. Again, requires some ability, and as teachers we must give students the right strategy. Now, another type of answer is the text where you don't ask students to give a specific answer or response. For example, listening to stories or jokes or films or watching films and videos. There may be a task, but if these stories or jokes that are interesting, learners will make an effort to understand in a natural way, right? Even without a preset task. Obviously, if you give them a task beforehand, it might help them to focus their attention on the listening. Now we're going to do something practical, and we're going to listen to some activities, and we're going to see which strategies we can teach our students in order to cope with this activity better, with this skill better. Now, so we're going to listen to something called buying furniture at IKEA. This is a place like home center, right? So there are some pre-listening activities here. For example, you have them here on the screen, right? And others, they're questions, okay? Students must think of some kind of shop like home center here, for example, or Sodimac, right? And then we're going to listen to two women, Julian and Sue. In this case, students must make notes on what they say. So here requires longer answers, right? Now, and this, which is the strategy to do this? Prediction. If you look at the list under Julian and under Sue, we can ask students to anticipate the things they sell, right? Or personal service, or cues, for example, cues or lines, right? What about cues on lines when they go to one of these shops? Is it boring, etc.? You can elicit answers from the students, right, as you answer them. They usually have lots of things to say about this according to their own experience. People always can say things according to their own experience, right? We all can say things about ourselves, so it's not so difficult for them to do this. And then we have these listening. I'm going to play it for you.
Recording 5.7. Gillian.
Well, I've been to IKEA, let me think, about 8 or 9 times. And I mean, you can't argue with the prices. Everything's, well, like everything's so cheap compared to other places. But I'm I'm not a fan of the place, I must admit.